I used to smile when someone called me daddy. Now it just hurts. All I ever wanted was to matter to someone. I thought I did. She told me the child was mine. I bought a crib the same week. But love doesn't always come with truth. And the truth nearly ended me. The baby's breathing was soft and even in the crib beside our bed. Ria's arm draped across my chest, her skin warm against mine in the humid Philippine night. "Clayton," she whispered, pressing her lips to my shoulder, "you're the best father she could have asked for." My heart swelled in a way I hadn't felt in decades. At 56, I thought my chance at being a real dad was long gone. 2 failed marriages back in North Carolina had left me convinced I was broken, unable to love right or be loved back. But here, in this tiny apartment in Tagbilaran, holding this woman who looked at me like I hung the moon, watching over a child who reached for me when she cried, I finally felt whole again. "She's lucky to have you too," I said, kissing the top of Ria's head. Her black hair smelled like sampaguita and baby powder. "We both are." It had only been 4 months since I'd moved them into this place. 4 months since I'd gone from being a lonely expat nursing cheap beer at sunset to a man with purpose. The rent was 8,000 pesos a month, more than most locals could afford. But seeing Ria's face light up when I handed the landlord the deposit made every peso worth it. "You don't have to do this," she'd said, tears in her eyes. "Yes, I do," I'd replied, and I meant it. I'd watched her struggle in that cramped room behind her mother's house, sharing space with 3 siblings and a baby who deserved better. The walls were thin as paper, and every night I could hear the child crying while Ria shushed her in whispered Bisaya. "She looks just like you," Ria murmured now, her fingers tracing circles on my chest. I glanced at the sleeping baby, her tiny fist curled near her cheek. Maybe it was wishful thinking, but I could almost see my late father's stubborn chin in her profile. "You think so?" I asked. "I know so," Ria said with such certainty that something warm and protective surged through me. This was what I'd been searching for my entire life without knowing it. Not just love, but responsibility. Not just companionship, but legacy. Back in North Carolina, my own kids had grown distant after the divorce. My son barely returned my calls, and my daughter sent polite but cold text messages on holidays. I'd failed them somehow, been too focused on work, too emotionally unavailable when they needed me most. But this baby, this precious little girl who wasn't even walking yet, she smiled when she saw me. When I came home from buying groceries or getting my prescription refilled at the pharmacy, she'd kick her legs and reach her arms up. "Daddy's home?" Ria would say, and my chest would tighten with pride and purpose. I'd changed more diapers in 4 months than I had in my previous lifetime. I'd learned to mix formula at exactly the right temperature, to bounce and sway in that particular rhythm that stopped the crying. At 3 in the morning, when she'd wake up hungry, I'd be the one to get up. I'd tell Ria, "You need your rest." But the truth was, I loved those quiet moments in the dark kitchen, warming a bottle while the baby babbled against my shoulder. "Are you happy here?" Ria asked, her voice suddenly vulnerable. The question caught me off guard. Why would you ask that? Sometimes I think, maybe you miss America. Maybe you think this is too much responsibility. I turned to face her fully, studying her delicate features in the moonlight streaming through our window. Her eyes were wide and uncertain, like she was waiting for me to disappear. "Ria, listen to me," I said, cupping her face. "I've never been happier anywhere in my life. You and the baby, you're not responsibility. You're my family. My real family." She smiled then, the kind of smile that made my stomach flutter like I was 25 again, instead of pushing 60. "I love you, Clayton." "I love you too." The baby stirred, making soft cooing sounds, and we both froze, waiting to see if she'd wake up. When she settled back into sleep, Ria giggled quietly. "She knows we're watching her." "Smart girl," I said. "Gets that from her mama." Ria's cheeks flushed pink. "And her daddy." The word hit me like electricity every single time. Daddy, Dad, Papa. I'd been called worse things and better things, but nothing had ever felt as right as that simple word from this woman's lips. Back home, I'd been Clayton the contractor, Clayton the ex-husband, Clayton the guy who drank too much after his back gave out and forced early retirement. But here, I was Daddy. I was the man who made sure there was milk in the refrigerator and diapers in the drawer. I was the one who sang off-key lullabies and made funny faces until the baby laughed. I mattered. I belonged. Tomorrow we should go to the market early, Ria said, before it gets too hot for her. Whatever you want, I replied, already mentally calculating how much we'd spend on vegetables and rice, on the special formula the baby preferred. Money that used to sit uselessly in my bank account back in Charlotte now had purpose. Every peso spent on this little family felt like an investment in something real, something lasting. You spoil us, Ria whispered. You deserve to be spoiled, I said, meaning every word. She'd been through so much, raising a baby alone, working long hours at the dental clinic for barely enough to survive. The father of her child had abandoned them both, disappeared to Cebu or Manila or God knows where, leaving her to struggle by herself. But not anymore. Not while I was here. Not while I had breath in my body and love in my heart. As I drifted toward sleep, listening to the gentle sounds of my family breathing, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a young man. Complete peace. Tomorrow would bring its small challenges and simple joys. Maybe the baby would take her first steps or say a new word. Maybe Ria would let me drive her to work and pick her up afterward, the way couples do when they're building a life together. Maybe we'd talk about getting married properly, with a ceremony her family could attend. The future stretched out ahead of us, bright and full of possibility. I was 56 years old, and I finally knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to be a father, a real one this time. I wanted to be the man who never left, who never let them down, who loved them fiercely until my last day on earth. And lying there in the dark, with Ria's heartbeat steady against my ribs and the baby sleeping peacefully in her crib, I believed with every fiber of my being that I could be exactly that man. I never came to the Philippines looking for love. Hell, I wasn't even looking for company. After my second marriage imploded spectacularly, after the insurance settlement from my back injury came through, all I wanted was distance. Distance from Charlotte, from the house I'd shared with Linda, from the job sites where everyone knew about my failures. My daughter Sarah had been the one to suggest Southeast Asia. Dad, you need to go somewhere you can't keep making the same mistakes, she'd said during one of our stilted phone conversations. She was right, though I didn't appreciate her honesty at the time. I was 55, twice divorced, physically broken, and emotionally bankrupt. The Philippines seemed as good a place as any to disappear. Bohol wasn't even my first choice. I'd planned to settle in Cebu City, maybe find an expat bar where I could drink beer and complain about America with other burned-out foreigners. But the flight connection was delayed, and I ended up spending a night in Tagbilaran instead. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of children playing in the street outside my hotel, their laughter mixing with the calls of roosters and the distant hum of motorbikes. Something about the sound made me stay an extra day, then another. By the end of the week, I'd rented a small apartment near the port and canceled my onward flight to Cebu. Maybe it was the slower pace, or the way strangers smiled and said, "Good morning, sir," even when they barely knew me. Maybe I was just tired of running. The dental clinic happened by accident, the way most important things do. I'd been in Tagbilaran about 3 weeks when I bit down wrong on some peanuts at the local market and felt my back molar crack clean in half. The pain was immediate and sharp, radiating up into my skull. I asked my landlord's son where to find a dentist, and he pointed me toward a narrow building squeezed between a pharmacy and a cell phone repair shop. The sign out front was in English and Tagalog, "Sunshine Dental Care, walk-ins welcome." Inside, the waiting area was cramped but clean, with plastic chairs and old magazines in 3 languages. That's when I first saw her. Ria was sitting behind the reception desk, writing something in a ledger with careful, precise handwriting. She looked up when I walked in, and her face transformed with one of the most genuine smiles I'd ever received. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" Her English was accented but clear, her voice soft and musical. I explained about the tooth, probably grimacing as another wave of pain hit. "Oh no," she said, immediately standing up. "Dr. Santos is with a patient, but he'll see you right away when he's finished. Please, sit. Would you like some water?" She brought me a glass of cold water and a small paper cup with 2 Tylenol. "For the pain," she explained. "Thank you," I said, struck by the simple kindness of the gesture. Most receptionists back home would have handed me a clipboard and told me to wait. While I sat there, trying not to think about the throbbing in my jaw, I watched her work. She answered the phone in 3 languages, switching seamlessly between English, Tagalog, and what I would later learn was Bisaya. She was gentle with the elderly patients, patient with the children who were afraid of the dentist, respectful with everyone who came through the door. There was something about her manner that radiated calm. When Dr. Santos finally called me in, the procedure was quick and professional. The cracked tooth needed a crown, which would take a few days to prepare. "Come back Friday," he said. "Ria will schedule your appointment." At the front desk, she pulled out a scheduling book and wrote my name in neat block letters. "Clayton Morrison, Friday at 10 a.m., she said, then looked up at me with those dark, thoughtful eyes. "Is this your first time in the Philippines?" "Yes," I said. "How did you know?" "You look a little lost," she said with a small smile that took any sting out of the words. "But in a good way, like you're discovering something new." She was right, though I wouldn't have known how to put it into words at the time. "The pharmacy next door has good pain medicine if the Tylenol isn't enough," she added. "And there's a nice cafe across the street if you want to sit somewhere quiet." I thanked her and left, but instead of going straight home, I found myself lingering on the street outside. Through the window, I could see her helping another patient, the same gentle attention she'd given me. Something about the way she moved, the care she took with everything, made me want to know more about her story. Friday couldn't come fast enough. When I returned for the crown fitting, she greeted me like we were old friends. "How was the pain?" she asked immediately. "Much better, thanks to you." After the appointment, I hesitated at her desk. "That cafe you mentioned, is it any good?" "Very good," she said. "I eat lunch there sometimes. Would you like to eat lunch there with me today?" I asked, feeling like a teenager asking someone to prom. She looked surprised, then pleased. "I get off work at noon. I'll wait," I said, and I did. Sitting on a bench across the street, watching the flow of people and vehicles, feeling more nervous and hopeful than I had in years. When she emerged at exactly noon, she'd changed from her work clothes into a simple yellow dress that made her look even younger than she was. "I hope you like Filipino food," she said as we walked to the cafe. "I'll try anything once," I replied, which made her laugh. "That's a good attitude for living here," she said. "You have to be open to new experiences." Over lunch, I learned that she was 29, originally from a barangay outside town, and that she'd worked at the dental clinic for almost 2 years. She lived with her family, helped support her younger siblings, and dreamed of maybe taking college classes someday. "What about you?" she asked. "What brought you so far from home?" I told her about the divorce, the injury, the general sense that my life in America had run out of steam. She listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions, never making me feel like a failure for starting over at my age. "Sometimes, we need to go far away to find what was missing," she said. "Maybe the Philippines is good for healing." "Maybe it is," I said, looking at her across the small table, wondering if she knew she was already part of that healing. We started meeting for lunch regularly after that. Nothing romantic at first, just 2 people who enjoyed each other's company. She showed me the best places to buy groceries, taught me basic Tagalog phrases, helped me navigate the bureaucracy of getting a proper visa. In return, I told her stories about America, about construction work and small-town life, and the differences between her culture and mine. "You're not like other foreigners," she said one day. "How so?" "You listen more than you talk, and you don't assume you know everything already." It was maybe the nicest compliment anyone had given me in years. 3 weeks into our friendship, she arrived at lunch looking tired and worried. "Everything okay?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Can I tell you something personal?" "Of course." That's when she told me about the baby. Her daughter was 6 months old, she said, and the father had left when she was still pregnant. He said he wasn't ready to be responsible for anyone. She explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now it's just me and her, and sometimes I don't know how I'm going to manage." My heart broke a little for her. "You're managing fine," I said. "You're working, you're taking care of your family. You're stronger than you think." "Some days I don't feel strong," she said. "Some days I feel very scared and alone." That night, I lay in my small apartment, thinking about her words. about the courage it took to raise a child alone, about the unfairness of men who walked away from their responsibilities. I thought about my own children back in America, how I'd failed them in different but equally painful ways. Maybe this was my chance to do better. Maybe this was why I'd ended up in this small city, in this dental office, meeting this remarkable woman who deserved so much more than life had given her so far. Maybe, just maybe, I could be the man who didn't walk away. Clayton, I need to tell you something, but I'm scared you'll think differently about me. Ria's voice trembled as we sat on the seawall that evening, watching fishing boats return to the harbor. We'd been having lunch together for almost a month, and I'd started to feel something deeper than friendship growing between us. The way she laughed at my terrible attempts at Bisaya, the way she remembered little things I mentioned, the way her eyes lit up when she saw me walking toward the dental clinic. But tonight felt different, heavy, like she was carrying something too big to hold alone. You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share, I said, though part of me was desperate to know what was causing the sadness I sometimes glimpsed behind her smiles. No, I do. Because I care about you, and if we're going to be friends, or maybe something more, you deserve to know the truth. She took a shaky breath. The baby I told you about, her name is Isabella. She's 8 months old now. I nodded, waiting. I'd seen her checking her phone during our lunches, always looking worried when she read text messages. Her father is named Miguel. He's from here, from Tagbilaran. We were together for 2 years. The pain in her voice made me want to reach for her hand, but I didn't want to interrupt. When I told him I was pregnant, he said he was happy. He said we'd get married, find a bigger place to live. He even came with me to my first doctor's appointment. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But when I got to 3 months, when I started showing, everything changed. He stopped coming around as much. He said he needed time to think, to prepare. Then one day, he just left. Left how? I asked gently. He took a job in Cebu. Or that's what his friends told me. He wouldn't answer my calls, wouldn't respond to my messages. His mother told my mother that he wasn't ready to be a father, that he was too young for that kind of responsibility. Too young. Her voice broke on those last words. He was 31 years old, Clayton. How is 31 too young to be responsible for your own child? The anger that rose in my chest surprised me with its intensity. I'd never met this Miguel, never even seen a picture of him, but I hated him in that moment with a force that was almost physical. What kind of man does that? I said. What kind of coward runs away from his own child? Ria looked at me with something like relief, as if she'd been afraid I might defend him or make excuses. I kept thinking he would come back, she said. Even after Isabella was born, I thought he would see her and realize what he was missing, but he never even asked for a photo. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun disappear into the sea. The air was cooling, and I could hear the sound of children playing in the distance. So it's just you and her, I said finally. Just us. My family helps when they can, but they have their own problems, their own children to worry about. Most days I feel like I'm drowning, just trying to keep up with everything. Work and the baby and the bills and the sleepless nights. She turned to look at me directly. I don't want you to feel sorry for me, but I needed you to know. In case you don't want to. In case this changes things between us. Changes things how? I asked. Well, I have a baby. A baby who needs diapers and formula and medicine when she's sick. I can't go out late or travel or be spontaneous. Most of my money goes to taking care of her. I'm not exactly a catch for someone like you. Someone like me? Someone who could have his choice of women. Someone who's lived in the world. Who has money and freedom. I couldn't help but laugh, though not cruelly. Ria, look at me, really look at me. I'm 56 years old. I've been married twice and screwed up both times. I'm in a foreign country because I couldn't figure out how to be happy in my own. If anyone should be worried about being good enough, it's me. She smiled through her tears. You're being too hard on yourself. And you're being too hard on yourself, I countered. You're raising a child by yourself while working full-time and helping support your family. You speak 3 languages, you're kind to everyone you meet, and you make me laugh every single day. Any man would be lucky to be part of your life. Even with all the complications? Especially with the complications, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. I've had my share of simple relationships, Ria. They didn't work out so well. That's when she told me the details that made my heart ache even more. How she'd had to move back in with her parents because she couldn't afford rent on her salary alone. How her mother had to watch Isabella during the day while Ria worked, which meant the older woman couldn't take on as much laundry work to earn extra money. How Isabella's crib was set up in the living room because there wasn't enough space anywhere else. How she lay awake at night wondering if she was being fair to her daughter, bringing her into a world where she'd grow up without a father. She deserves better, Ria said. She deserves a real home, with her own room, with 2 parents who love her. She has a parent who loves her, I said firmly. The most important parent, the one who stayed. But what about when she gets older and asks where her daddy is? What do I tell her? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with all the pain and uncertainty of single motherhood. I thought about my own kids, how the divorce had affected them, how they'd learned not to count on me being there for the important moments, how I'd prioritized work over family until it was too late to repair the damage. You tell her the truth, I said eventually, that her daddy wasn't ready to be the man she needed him to be. But that doesn't mean she isn't worthy of love. It just means he wasn't worthy of her. Ria wiped her eyes again. Sometimes I think about trying to contact him, to tell him how beautiful she is, how smart, maybe if he saw her. No, I said more sharply than I intended. He made his choice, Ria. He doesn't get to come back when it's convenient for him and disrupt your life again. You and Isabella, you're doing fine without him. Are we, though? Really? The vulnerability in her voice broke something open in my chest. I can't give her everything she needs. I can't afford the best formula or the nice clothes or the educational toys. I can't even take her to the beach because I don't have a car and the tricycle ride is too expensive for something that's not necessary. What if you didn't have to do it alone? The words came out before I'd fully thought them through, but once they were spoken, I realized I meant them completely. What if someone wanted to help? Not because they felt sorry for you, but because they cared about you both? She looked at me with wide eyes. Clayton, what are you saying? I'm saying that I've been looking for a purpose since I got here. Maybe longer than that. I'm saying that when I think about going home to my empty apartment tonight, I wish I was going home to you and Isabella instead. The honesty of it scared me, but it also felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. I'm saying that Miguel was an idiot, but his loss might be my gain, if you'll let it be. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice was soft, hopeful. Babies cry at 3 a.m. They get sick and need expensive medicine. They require constant attention and patience and sacrifice. I know, I said. And I want all of that. I want the crying and the sleepless nights and the worry. I want to be the person you can count on when things get hard. I want to be the man who doesn't leave. We walked back toward town in comfortable silence, both of us processing what had just happened between us. As we reached the corner where we usually said goodbye, Ria stopped and looked up at me. Would you like to meet her? She asked. Isabella. Tomorrow is Sunday, and I don't have to work. You could come for lunch, if you want. My heart hammered against my ribs. I would love that more than anything. I said, Really? Really? She stood on her toes and kissed my cheek, a soft brush of lips that sent electricity through my entire body. Thank you, Clayton. For listening. For understanding. For not running away. I'm not going anywhere, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. As I walked home alone that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The sense that I was exactly where I belonged, about to become exactly who I was meant to be. Tomorrow I would meet Isabella, and if I was lucky, she would be the first step toward building the family I'd always wanted but never known how to create. I fell asleep that night, thinking about baby formula and tiny clothes and the possibility of love that came with no guarantees but infinite rewards. The first time I noticed Ria acting strange, I told myself I was being paranoid. We'd been living together for 6 weeks by then, and I thought I knew her routines, her habits, the rhythm of her days. But that Tuesday morning her phone buzzed while she was feeding Isabella, and when she saw the caller ID, her whole body went rigid. I need to take this, she said, stepping onto the small balcony and closing the door behind her. Through the glass I could see her pacing, her voice urgent but too quiet for me to make out the words. When she came back inside 10 minutes later, her smile looked forced. Who was that? I asked casually. My cousin from Manila, she said, not meeting my eyes. Family stuff, nothing important. It should have been nothing. People get phone calls from relatives all the time. But something about the way she'd reacted, the tension in her shoulders, the way she'd suddenly seemed eager to leave for work early, stuck with me all day. I tried to push it aside, focusing instead on the shopping list she'd left me and the domestic satisfaction of buying groceries for my family. Our family. But the doubt was there now, small and insistent, like a pebble in my shoe. 3 days later it happened again. This time we were at the market together, Isabella balanced on my hip while Ria selected vegetables. Her phone rang, and again that same physical reaction, that sudden stillness. "I'll be right back," she said, taking Isabella from me and walking toward the far end of the market to answer. I pretended to examine mangoes while keeping one eye on her distant figure. She was animated now, gesturing with her free hand, her posture defensive. When she returned, she was quiet and distracted for the rest of the morning. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Of course," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Why wouldn't it be? I started paying closer attention after that, hating myself for it but unable to stop. When her phone buzzed during dinner, she'd glance at it and then quickly flip it face down on the table. Sometimes, she'd excuse herself to use the bathroom, and I'd hear the low murmur of her voice through the door. Once, I walked into the bedroom while she was texting and she practically threw the phone across the bed, laughing too loudly. "You scared me," she said. "Sorry," I replied, though I was the one who felt unsettled. The lies started small. She said she was going to visit her sister after work, but when I offered to drive her, she said the sister would pick her up instead. That evening, she came home with shopping bags from a mall that was in the opposite direction from her sister's house. When I mentioned it, she looked confused for a moment, then said, "Oh, we stopped there on the way back. I forgot." Another time, she said she needed to work late to help with inventory at the dental clinic, but when I called the main number at 7 p.m., the receptionist said they'd closed at the regular time and everyone had gone home hours ago. "You must have called the wrong number," Ria said when I mentioned it. We were definitely working late. The worst part wasn't the lying itself. It was the way I found myself making excuses for her. She was probably embarrassed about asking her family for money, I told myself. Or maybe she was planning some kind of surprise for me and didn't want to ruin it. Maybe I was misremembering what she'd told me, or misunderstanding because of cultural differences. I was a foreigner here, after all. Maybe I didn't fully grasp the complexities of her family obligations or work situation, but then came the incident with Isabella's formula. I'd been buying the same brand for weeks, the expensive imported kind that Ria said was best for the baby's sensitive stomach. One evening, I noticed we were running low and offered to pick some up on my way home from the internet cafe. "Oh, I already got some," she said. I stopped at the store near work during lunch. She showed me the can, same brand, same type. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I happened to notice the receipt sticking out of her purse. It was from a pharmacy in Dowie, nearly an hour away by tricycle. Why would she travel so far for formula she could buy 5 minutes from her workplace? When I asked her about it later, her explanation was flustered and inconsistent. First, she said she'd had errands to run in that area anyway. Then she said the formula was cheaper at that particular pharmacy. Then she said she'd gone with a friend who needed to visit someone there. 3 different stories in the span of 5 minutes. I wanted to believe her, needed to believe her. But the doubt was growing stronger every day. The phone calls were becoming more frequent, always answered in Bisaya, always requiring privacy. Sometimes she'd step outside even when Isabella was napping and I was reading, claiming she didn't want to wake the baby. But I could see her through the window, pacing and gesticulating, occasionally raising her voice in what sounded like frustration or anger. "Family problems," she'd say when she came back inside. "My brother is having trouble with his girlfriend." Very dramatic. But when I suggested that maybe her brother could come visit sometime, she quickly changed the subject. I started to notice things about her behavior that I'd previously attributed to fatigue or stress. The way she'd sometimes zone out during conversations, staring at her phone screen even when no messages were coming through. The way she'd become defensive if I asked simple questions about her day. The way she'd suddenly develop headaches or stomach problems when I suggested we visit her family or go somewhere together as a group. "I don't want to burden them with my problems," she'd say. It's better if I handle things myself. One evening, we were walking through the plaza after dinner when I saw someone I recognized from the expat meetups waving at me. Ron, a retired Canadian who'd been living in Bohol for 3 years. Clayton, good to see you, he said, approaching our bench. And this must be the family I've heard so much about. I introduced him to Ria and Isabella, proud to show off my girls. But Ria was tense throughout the entire conversation, barely speaking, clearly eager to leave. Nice meeting you both, Ron said as we prepared to go. You're a lucky man, Clayton. As we walked away, Ria was unusually quiet. He seems nice, I said. She replied non-committally. He mentioned hearing about us. I guess I talk about you and Isabella more than I realized. She stopped walking suddenly. What exactly do you tell them? About me? The sharpness in her voice caught me off guard. Good things, I said. That I'm happy. That I love you both. Why? I prefer to keep our private life private, you know. Some people, they gossip. They make assumptions. It was a reasonable request, but something about the way she said it felt less like privacy and more like secrecy. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the woman I'd fallen in love with and the growing sense that I didn't really know her at all. The Ria who made me coffee every morning and sang softly to Isabella while changing her diaper felt real and genuine. But this other Ria, the one who flinched when her phone rang and told different versions of the same story, was someone I couldn't figure out. Maybe every relationship had these moments of doubt, I told myself. Maybe I was being unfair, expecting too much transparency too soon. We'd only been together for a few months. After all, trust took time to build. But deep down, in a place I wasn't ready to examine too closely, I knew something was wrong. The pebble in my shoe was becoming a rock, and no amount of wishful thinking was going to make it go away. I just wasn't ready to admit that the woman I'd rescued might be the one who ended up breaking my heart. Not yet. Not when I could still choose to believe her, to give her the benefit of every doubt, to protect the fragile happiness we'd built together from the harsh light of too many questions. I was coming back from the Sorry store with diapers and milk powder when I saw them. At first, it didn't register, just another tricycle weaving through the afternoon traffic on Carlos P. Garcia Avenue. But something about the passenger made me look twice. Long black hair, yellow sundress, a baby cradled in her arms. Ria. My heart did a small flip of recognition, and I almost waved, almost called out her name. Then I saw the driver. He was young, maybe late 20s, with the kind of lean build that comes from physical work. His arm was draped casually across the back of the seat, and when he turned his head to say something to Ria, she laughed and leaned closer to him. It was intimate in a way that made my stomach clench. The tricycle was moving away from me, heading toward the old market, and I stood there on the sidewalk holding my shopping bags like an idiot, watching my girlfriend and my daughter disappear with a stranger. Sir, you okay? The vendor from the store had followed me outside, probably concerned that I was having some kind of medical episode. Yes, I said automatically, though my voice sounded strange in my own ears. Just tired. I paid for my items and walked home in a daze, replaying what I'd seen, trying to find an innocent explanation. Maybe it was her cousin, the one from Manila she'd mentioned. Maybe it was a coworker giving her a ride. Maybe I hadn't seen what I thought I'd seen at all. But when Ria came home 2 hours later, carrying Isabella and 3 bags of groceries, her story didn't match what I'd witnessed. Where have you been? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Shopping, she said, setting the bags down on our small kitchen counter. The market near my mother's house had better prices today. Did you walk all the way there? No, I took a tricycle. By yourself? She looked at me strangely. Of course, by yourself. Why? I thought I saw you earlier. On Carlos P. Garcia. You were with someone. The pause before she answered lasted just a beat too long. Oh, that must have been my cousin John. He offered to help me carry Isabella while I shopped. You know how heavy she's getting. She busied herself unpacking vegetables, not meeting my eyes. June? My cousin from my mother's side. He lives near the old market. I didn't know you had a cousin named June. I have many cousins, Clayton. I don't tell you about all of them. There was an edge to her voice now, defensive. Is there a reason you're asking so many questions? I wanted to press her, wanted to ask why this June had his arm around her, why she'd been laughing with him like they were more than cousins, why she'd never mentioned him before. But something in her posture warned me off. Instead, I helped her put away the groceries and tried to forget what I'd seen. That night, she was affectionate and chatty, telling me about her day at work, asking about mine. When she fell asleep curled against my side, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. 3 days later, I saw them again. This time I was sitting outside a cafe near the port, drinking coffee and reading a week-old copy of the Manila Bulletin that someone had left behind. The tricycle pulled up across the street, and I watched as the same young man helped Ria climb down, then carefully handed Isabella to her. But before she walked away, something happened that made my blood freeze in my veins. The man reached out and touched Isabella's cheek, smiling down at her with the kind of tenderness I thought was reserved for family. Then he leaned forward and kissed the baby's forehead, a soft, lingering kiss that spoke of familiarity and love. Isabella reached for him, her little arms stretching toward his face. She knew him. She was comfortable with him. This wasn't some distant cousin helping with groceries. This was someone who mattered to her, someone she recognized and trusted. The man said something to Ria that made her nod seriously. Then he climbed back onto his tricycle and drove away. Ria stood there for a moment, watching him go, holding Isabella against her chest. Even from across the street, I could see the sadness in her posture. That evening, I couldn't help myself. "Ria, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." She looked up from feeding Isabella, her expression guarded. "What is it?" "Today I saw you again with that man, the one you said was your cousin Jun. But the way he acted with Isabella, it didn't look like a cousin. It looked like—" I struggled to find the words. "It looked like he knew her very well." The spoon in her hand trembled slightly. "What are you trying to say, Clayton?" "I'm trying to say that something doesn't feel right. The phone calls you won't let me hear, the trips to places you won't explain, and now this man who kisses our daughter like she belongs to him." "She's not our daughter," Ria said quietly, and the words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "She's my daughter, and yes, June loves her. He's been part of her life since she was born." "Who is he, Ria?" "Really? He's—" She set the spoon down and covered her face with her hands. "He's Miguel's brother." The world tilted sideways. "Miguel's brother? The Miguel who abandoned you? Who ran away to Cebu?" "Yes." "And you didn't think to mention that his brother was still around, still involved with Isabella?" "It's complicated, Clayton." "Complicated how?" "Because Jun never agreed with what Miguel did. He wanted to help with Isabella from the beginning, but I was too proud, too angry. When Miguel left, I told his whole family I didn't want anything to do with any of them. But you changed your mind. When Isabella got sick last month, really sick with that fever, June heard about it somehow. He came to the hospital and helped pay for her medicine. He said it didn't matter what his brother had done, Isabella was still his niece and he loved her." My mind raced back to that week, remembering how Ria had been stressed about money, about the hospital bills, about getting time off work. I'd offered to help, but she'd insisted she could handle it. "You never told me she was in the hospital." "It was only for one night. You were dealing with your visa renewal, and I didn't want to worry you with more problems. So instead you turned to Miguel's family. I turned to someone who loves Isabella and wanted to help." "And the phone calls? The secret trips?" "Jun checks on her. He brings medicine when she needs it. Formula when I can't afford the good kind, clothes that his girlfriend's sister has outgrown. He's trying to do what his brother should have done." I felt like I was drowning in information that changed everything I thought I knew about our life together. "Why didn't you just tell me this from the beginning?" "Because I was afraid you'd leave," she said, and for the first time in weeks, her honesty felt complete and raw. "I was afraid you'd think I was still connected to Miguel's family, still hoping he'd come back. I was afraid you'd see June with Isabella and realize that she already has an uncle who loves her, people who knew her before you came along. And that would make me leave because why would you want to deal with all that drama? Why would you want to be part of a family that's so broken and complicated?" I sat there processing her words, trying to separate my hurt from my understanding. "Ria, do you think so little of me that you believe I'd abandon you and Isabella because she has family who care about her?" "I don't know what I think anymore," she said, tears starting to fall. I just know that you're the best thing that's happened to us, and I'm terrified of losing you. You're not going to lose me because Isabella has an uncle, but you might lose me because you've been lying to me for weeks. I wasn't lying exactly. I was just not telling you everything. That's the same thing, Ria. When you let me believe that June was some random cousin, when you sneak around meeting with him, when you take money and help from him without telling me, that's lying. She was crying openly now, and Isabella, sensing the tension, started to fuss. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Clayton. I just didn't know how to tell you without ruining everything. I wanted to comfort her, wanted to say it was okay, and we'd figure it out together. But trust, once cracked, doesn't heal easily. Is there anything else? I asked. Any other family members or friends or complications you haven't mentioned? No, she said quickly. Nothing else. I promise. And Miguel? Is he really in Cebu, or is he somewhere closer? He's in Cebu. June says he's working construction there, living with another woman. He hasn't asked about Isabella once since he left. That night, I lay awake long after Ria had cried herself to sleep, staring at Isabella in her crib and wondering what else I didn't know about the woman beside me. The rational part of my mind understood her position. She was protecting herself and her daughter the only way she knew how. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt too many times before, whispered that if she could lie about this, she could lie about anything. And once that whisper started, I couldn't make it stop. The next morning, Ria was quiet and subdued, moving around our apartment like she was afraid I might disappear at any moment. I want to meet him, I said over breakfast. Who? June. If he's going to be part of Isabella's life, I want to know who he is. She looked relieved and terrified at the same time. Are you sure? I'm sure. And Ria? No more secrets. If we're going to make this work, I need to know everything. The good, the bad, and the complicated. Okay, she said. I'll arrange it. But even as she agreed, even as she reached across the table to squeeze my hand in gratitude, I could see something in her eyes that looked like fear, and I couldn't shake the feeling that June was just the tip of an iceberg I wasn't prepared to see in its entirety. The foundation of trust we'd built was cracking, and I wasn't sure either of us knew how to repair it before it collapsed completely. The FedEx package arrived on a Tuesday morning while Ria was at work and Isabella was napping. I signed for it with hands that trembled slightly, then sat at our small kitchen table staring at the return address. Paternity USA Laboratory Services. 3 weeks had passed since I'd placed the order online. 3 weeks of second-guessing myself, of almost canceling it a dozen times. But June's kiss on Isabella's forehead haunted me, along with all the small inconsistencies that had been adding up like water drops until they became a flood I couldn't ignore. Inside the package were 2 cotton swab kits, collection instructions in multiple languages, and a prepaid shipping envelope. The process was simpler than I'd expected. 1 swab for me, 1 for Isabella. Send them back and wait 7 to 10 business days for results. The clinical simplicity of it felt wrong somehow, like reducing the love I felt for that little girl to a medical procedure, but I needed to know. The doubt was eating me alive from the inside out. I waited until that evening, when Ria went to take a shower after dinner. Isabella was sleepy and content, making soft cooing sounds as I held her on the couch. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I whispered, gently swabbing the inside of her cheek. She didn't even fuss, just looked up at me with those dark eyes that I'd convinced myself looked like my father's. I collected my own sample quickly, sealed both swabs in their respective containers, and hid the package in my toolbox on the balcony. Tomorrow, I'd mail it while Ria was at work. That night I barely slept. Ria curled against me, her breathing deep and even, while I stared at the ceiling and wrestled with guilt and fear in equal measure. What kind of man secretly tests a baby he claims to love? What did it say about me that I couldn't take Ria's word, couldn't trust the woman I'd been planning to marry? But then I'd remember the lies, the phone calls, the way June looked at Isabella like she belonged to him, and the guilt would be replaced by a cold certainty that I needed answers. The next few days dragged by with agonizing slowness. Every time Ria mentioned plans for the future, every time Isabella smiled at me or reached for my face, I felt like a fraud. At the expat meetup that Thursday, I found myself sitting next to Ron, the Canadian retiree who'd been in Bohol for 3 years. We'd chatted casually before, but tonight I needed to talk to someone who might understand. Can I ask you something personal? I said after we'd both had a few beers. Shoot, Ron replied. Did you ever? I mean, when you got involved with your girlfriend, did you ever have doubts about? I struggled to find the right words. About whether everything was exactly what it seemed? Ron was quiet for a long moment, studying the label on his beer bottle. You want to know if I ever questioned whether my kid was actually mine? The directness of his response caught me off guard. How did you? Because I see that look in your eyes, brother. Same look I had about 2 years ago. What did you do? Got a DNA test, he said simply. Took me 6 months to work up the courage, but I finally did it. And? Kid wasn't mine. Turns out my girlfriend had been seeing her ex-boyfriend the whole time we were together. The kid was his. My stomach dropped. Jesus, Ron. I'm sorry. Don't be. Best thing that ever happened to me. Finding out the truth. Saved me from years of being played for a fool. He looked at me directly. But it nearly destroyed me for a while. You sure you want to go down this road? I don't think I have a choice, I said. The doubts are killing me. Then you already know what you have to do. Just be prepared for either answer, you know? Because sometimes the truth is worse than the uncertainty. And sometimes it's the only thing that can set you free. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the other expats play pool and complain about the heat. If you need someone to talk to when you get the results, Ron said eventually, you know where to find me. The waiting was the worst part. Every day I'd check the tracking number online, watching the samples make their way from the Philippines to California to the lab in Pennsylvania. Ria noticed my distraction, asking several times if everything was okay, if I was feeling sick or worried about something. Just tired, I'd say, hating myself for lying even as I wondered how many lies she'd told me with the same casual ease. Isabella turned 10 months old during the waiting period. Ria organized a small celebration, inviting her mother and sisters over for lunch. I watched them all doting on the baby, speaking to her in Bisaya, passing her from aunt to grandmother with the easy familiarity of family. At one point, Ria's mother commented on how much Isabella was starting to look like her father. Such strong features, she said in English, glancing at me with approval. She will be beautiful like her mama, but strong like her papa. I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the proud father while inside I felt like I was suffocating. What if the old woman was right about Isabella looking like her father, but wrong about who that father was? What if everyone in this room knew something I didn't? The paranoia was becoming unbearable, making me question every interaction, every casual comment, every shared glance between Ria and her family. On day 12 of waiting, I was beginning to think the samples had been lost or the results delayed when I got an email notification. Your Paternity USA results are ready for secure online viewing. I was at an internet cafe in town supposedly checking my bank account and paying bills online. My hands shook as I logged into the portal, entered my confirmation number, and waited for the page to load. The results were displayed in clinical black and white, no room for interpretation or hope. Probability of paternity 0%. The words blurred together as I read the technical explanation, the charts and graphs that all pointed to the same devastating conclusion. I was not Isabella's biological father. The little girl I'd fallen in love with, the child I'd been supporting and protecting and planning a future around, was not mine. She had never been mine. I sat in that internet cafe for over an hour, reading and rereading the results, hoping I'd misunderstood something. But the science was clear and unforgiving. Every cell in Isabella's body told a story that didn't include me. I was just a stranger who'd fallen for a lie, a lonely old man who'd been so desperate for family that I'd ignored every red flag, every inconsistency, every moment when my gut told me something was wrong. When I finally stumbled out into the afternoon heat, the world looked different. The same tricycles and jeepneys moved through the same streets, the same vendors sold the same fruits, but everything felt hollow and false. I walked for hours without direction, trying to process what this meant for me, for Ria, for the life we'd built together. How do you confront someone with evidence of their deception? How do you look at a child you love and accept that she's not yours? How do you rebuild trust that never really existed in the first place? By the time I made it home, Ria was cooking dinner, and Isabella was playing on a blanket on the floor. The scene was so normal, so domestic, that for a moment I wanted to pretend the test results didn't exist. How was your day? Ria asked, kissing my cheek as I walked through the door. Fine, I lied, watching Isabella crawl toward me with a huge smile. She pulled herself up on my legs, babbling happily, and my heart broke all over again. I loved this child. Test results couldn't change that. But love built on lies wasn't really love at all, was it? Clayton, are you okay? You look pale. Ria's concern seemed genuine, but then, her lies had always seemed genuine too. I'm just tired, I said, the same excuse I'd been using for weeks. Maybe I'm coming down with something. You should rest, she said, touching my forehead to check for fever. I can handle bedtime tonight. I nodded and escaped to our bedroom, where I sat on the edge of the bed with the printed test results in my hands, trying to figure out how to destroy the woman I loved with the truth she'd been hiding from me all along. Tomorrow I would have to confront her. Tomorrow the careful life we'd constructed would come crashing down. But tonight, I could still pretend that Isabella was mine, that Ria loved me for who I was instead of what I could provide, that the three of us were really a family instead of an elaborate performance designed to separate a lonely foreigner from his money and his heart. Tonight, I could still live in the beautiful lie for just a few more hours before the truth set us all free. The paper trembled in my hands as I read the results for the 5th time. Probability of paternity, 0%. The clinical language felt like a slap across the face. Not 15%, not 3%, not even a fraction of a percent that might leave room for error or hope. 0. Absolutely, scientifically, unequivocally 0. I was not Isabella's father. I never had been. For 6 months, I'd been living a lie so complete that it had become my reality. I heard Ria's key in the lock, followed by her voice calling out, "Clayton, I'm home early." "Doctor." Santos canceled his afternoon appointments. I quickly folded the papers and shoved them into the drawer of our bedside table, my heart hammering against my ribs. How do you look at someone you love and tell them you know they've been deceiving you? How do you hold a conversation about dinner and weekend plans when you're holding evidence that your entire relationship is built on fraud? "How was your day?" she asked, walking into the bedroom with Isabella balanced on her hip. The baby saw me and immediately reached out, making the little cooing sounds that usually melted my heart. Today they felt like knives. "It was fine," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. "Actually, I need to talk to you about something." "Oh? What about?" She set Isabella down on the bed, and the baby immediately crawled toward me, pulling herself up on my knees with a huge smile. I looked down at this beautiful child who'd called me Papa for months, who laughed when I made funny faces, who fell asleep in my arms every night. The love I felt for her was real, even if everything else was a lie. "Ria, I need you to be honest with me about something." "Okay," she said, but I could see wariness creeping into her expression. "Is there anything about Isabella's father that you haven't told me?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you absolutely certain that Miguel is her father?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Ria's face went through a series of micro-expressions, too quick for me to fully interpret, but I caught surprise, fear, and something that looked like calculation. "Of course I'm certain," she said finally. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I had a DNA test done." The words came out flat and emotionless, like I was reading from a script. "A DNA test to see if I'm Isabella's biological father." Ria went very still. Even Isabella seemed to sense the tension, looking back and forth between us with wide, confused eyes. "You did what?" "I collected samples and sent them to a lab in the United States. The results came back today." "And?" Her voice was barely a whisper. 0% probability. "I'm not her father, Ria. I never was." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the neighbor's television through the thin walls, the sound of traffic from the street below, the tick of the cheap clock on our dresser. But from Ria, nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, harder. "Why did you do that? Why couldn't you just trust me?" "Because you've been lying to me about everything else," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "The phone calls, the mysterious trips, Jun, the stories that never quite add up. I needed to know the truth about something. So you went behind my back. You tested my daughter without my permission." "Our daughter," I corrected automatically, then caught myself. "Except she's not our daughter, is she?" "She's your daughter, and somebody else's. Ria picked up Isabella, holding her protectively against her chest. You had no right. I had every right. You told me I was her father. You let me pay for everything. Move you both into this apartment. Buy her clothes and food and medicine. You let me fall in love with her. You are her father, she said, and for a moment I thought she was going to continue the lie. In every way that matters, you are her father. Except biologically. Biology doesn't make a father, Clayton. Love does. Care does. Being there when she needs you does. Who is her real father? I asked. Miguel? I told you Miguel left. That's not what I asked. I asked if Miguel is her biological father. Another long pause. Yes, she said, but something in her tone made me doubt even that. Are you sure? Or is it possible that you don't know who her father is? How dare you? I dare because I've been supporting a child I thought was mine based on what you told me. I dare because I've restructured my entire life around a family that apparently doesn't exist. She exists, Ria said fiercely. I exist. Our love exists. Does it? Because love requires trust, and I don't think I can trust anything you've told me. I stood up and walked to the drawer, pulling out the lab results. Here, read them yourself. See what 6 months of your lies look like in black and white. She took the papers with a shaking hand, her eyes scanning the technical language and charts. When she looked up, there were tears on her cheeks, but her expression was defiant rather than apologetic. You said you wanted a family, she said quietly. I gave you a family. You gave me an illusion. I gave you love. I gave you purpose. I gave you a chance to be the father you never were to your own children back in America. The accuracy of that statement hit like a physical blow. She wasn't wrong. I had been a terrible father to my biological children, too wrapped up in work and my own problems to be present for them. That doesn't make this right. What's right, Clayton? Leaving a woman and baby to struggle alone because a piece of paper says you don't share DNA? What's right is honesty. What's right is letting me make an informed choice about my life instead of manipulating me into it. You made your choice every day for 6 months. You chose to love her, to take care of her, to be her father. The DNA doesn't change any of that. The DNA changes everything. Only if you let it. She was crying openly now, but her voice remained steady. I know what I did was wrong. I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning. But I was scared, and I was desperate, and you were the first good man who ever wanted to help us. So, you decided to trap me with lies. I decided to give my daughter the father she deserved, even if he wasn't the one who made her. The simplicity of her logic was almost admirable in its audacity. And what about what I deserved? Didn't I deserve the truth? You deserved to be happy. And you were happy, Clayton. We all were. We were happy based on a lie. We were happy based on love. The lie was just the beginning. Isabella had been unusually quiet during our confrontation, but now she started to fuss, perhaps sensing the emotional turmoil around her. Ria bounced her gently, whispering soft words in Bisaya. She doesn't understand what's happening, Ria said, but she knows you're upset. She knows her world is changing. The sight of that innocent child caught in the middle of adult deception and heartbreak was almost too much to bear. I need you to leave, I said suddenly. What? I need you to pack your things and go. I can't look at you right now without feeling like a fool. Clayton, please. Let's talk about this. Let's figure out how to move forward. There is no moving forward. Not from this. You're going to throw away everything we built because of a test? I'm going to stop living a lie because I finally know the truth. Ria stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fine. But I want you to know that everything else was real. My feelings for you, Isabella's love for you, the happiness we shared. That was all real. Was it? Or was that part of the performance too? She didn't answer, just began gathering her things and Isabella's belongings with efficient, heartbroken movements. Watching her pack our life into plastic bags was surreal, like watching a movie of someone else's disaster. Where will you go? I asked, hating myself for still caring. To my mother's house. We'll be fine. And Jun? Will he help you? June will do what family does. He'll help take care of his niece. His niece. Yes, his niece. Not yours. Never yours according to this piece of paper you care about so much. She held up the lab results, then dropped them on the bed. But she loved you like a father, Clayton, and you loved her like a daughter. The DNA doesn't change that. She was right, of course. The love was real, even if everything else was fabricated. But love built on deception isn't sustainable. It becomes poisoned by doubt, corroded by the knowledge that it began with betrayal. I'm sorry, I said as she headed toward the door with Isabella and their belongings. I'm sorry it had to end this way. So am I, she replied without turning around. More than you'll ever know. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and suddenly the apartment was silent in a way it hadn't been for months. No baby sounds, no Bisaya lullabies, no gentle domestic chatter. Just me and the lab results and the devastating knowledge that the best 6 months of my life had been based on the most complete lie anyone had ever told me. I sat on the bed where Isabella had taken her afternoon naps, surrounded by the detritus of a family that had never really existed, and finally allowed myself to cry for everything I'd lost and everything I'd never actually had. The silence was what hit me first. For 6 months I'd grown accustomed to the sounds of a family, the beautiful chaos of a baby's schedule, the morning bottle preparation, the soft singing during diaper changes, the gentle cooing and babbling that served as the soundtrack to our days. Now there was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the distant noise of traffic filtering through windows that seemed too large for the empty rooms. I sat on the couch for 3 hours after they left, staring at the spot where Isabella's bouncy seat used to be. The apartment felt cavernous without their presence, like a house after a funeral when all the mourners have gone home. Every surface reminded me of them. The kitchen counter where I'd warmed countless bottles at 2 a.m. The living room floor where Isabella had taken her first wobbly steps just 2 weeks ago. The balcony where Ria and I had shared quiet conversations while the baby napped. The smell of them lingered everywhere. Ria's shampoo in the bathroom, the baby powder and lotion that had become as familiar as my own cologne. I opened the refrigerator and found half a container of formula, a bag of cut-up fruit that Ria had prepared for Isabella's afternoon snack, a bottle of the special coconut water she liked to drink after work, evidence of a life that had vanished in the span of 30 minutes. That first night was the worst. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every creak and settling sound in the building. The mattress felt too big, the room too quiet. I kept listening for Isabella's soft breathing, for the rustle of Ria turning over in her sleep. At 3 a.m., my body woke me out of habit, the internal clock that had been trained to respond to nighttime feeding schedules. For a confused moment, I reached toward the crib before remembering it was gone. The days blurred together after that. I stopped shaving, stopped cooking real meals, stopped leaving the apartment except for absolute necessities. I'd order food delivery and eat mechanically while scrolling through photos on my phone, hundreds of pictures of Isabella that I couldn't bring myself to delete. Her first smile, her first solid foods, the afternoon she'd fallen asleep on my chest while we watched television. Every image was evidence of love that had been real even if its foundation was false. On the 4th day, I called my daughter Sarah in Charlotte. It was early morning in the Philippines, which made it late evening in North Carolina. She answered on the 2nd ring, sounding surprised to hear from me. "Dad, is everything okay?" "I'm not sure," I said, and then proceeded to tell her the whole story. The loneliness that had driven me to the Philippines, meeting Ria, falling in love with Isabella, the months of building what I thought was a real family, and finally the DNA test that had shattered everything. "Oh, Dad," she said when I finished. There was so much compassion in her voice that I almost started crying again. "I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating. I feel like such an idiot," I admitted. A lonely old man who got taken advantage of by a pretty young woman with a sob story. "Don't do that to yourself," Sarah said firmly. "You're not an idiot for wanting to love someone. You're not wrong for trying to build a family. She's the one who lied, not you. But I should have seen the signs, the inconsistencies, the secrecy, the way things never quite added up. You saw what you wanted to see because you were happy. There's nothing wrong with that." We talked for over an hour, the longest conversation we'd had in years. She told me about her job, her relationship, the small details of her life that I'd been too distant to ask about before. "I miss you, Dad," she said before we hung up. "I know I haven't been the best daughter, but I do miss having you in my life." "You've been a wonderful daughter," I said. I was the one who failed as a father. Too focused on work, too emotionally unavailable. Maybe that's why I fell so hard for the chance to try again with Isabella. It's never too late to try again with your actual children, she said gently. We're still here, Dad. We're still your family, DNA and all. The conversation left me feeling simultaneously heartbroken and hopeful. Maybe losing Isabella could be the beginning of reconnecting with the children I'd never properly appreciated. A week after Ria and Isabella left, Ron from the expat group knocked on my door. I hadn't been to the weekly meetups, hadn't answered my phone, had basically disappeared from the small community of foreigners who gathered to complain about visa requirements and celebrate each other's birthdays. Thought I'd check on you, he said when I opened the door. You look like hell. Feel like it too, I replied, letting him in. We sat on my couch drinking beer and talking about the peculiar pain of losing a family you never actually had. The kid still feels like yours, doesn't she? He asked, even knowing the truth. Yeah, I keep thinking about her bedtime routine, wondering if she's sleeping okay without me reading her those silly stories. Wondering if she's confused about why I disappeared. They adapt faster than we do, Ron said. Kids that age, they live in the moment. She'll be fine. What about me? You'll be fine too, eventually, but it takes time. Ron told me more about his own experience, how the revelation that his girlfriend's son wasn't his had led him to reevaluate everything about his life in the Philippines. I thought about going home, he said, back to Canada, back to familiar disappointments. But then I realized that would just be running away again. The problem wasn't the country or the culture. The problem was that I was so desperate for connection I ignored obvious red flags. So what did you do? I stayed, but I stayed for me, not for some fantasy about what my life could be with the right woman. After Ron left, I sat alone with my thoughts and a growing sense of clarity. The pain of losing Isabella and Ria was real and legitimate, but underneath it was something else, something that might have been relief. For 6 months I'd been trying to be someone I wasn't sure I could sustain. The perfect father, the devoted provider, the man who never questioned or doubted. It had been exhausting in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. Maybe the DNA test had saved me from years of living a lie. Maybe discovering the truth now was better than discovering it when Isabella was 5 or 10 or 15, when the deception would have been even more devastating. Maybe being alone was better than being with someone who saw me as a solution to her problems rather than a person worthy of honesty and respect. 2 weeks after they left, I received a text message from an unknown number. Isabella keeps looking for you. She cries when she hears men's voices that sound like yours. I thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling my carefully constructed emotional walls crumble. The image of Isabella looking for me, confused and heartbroken, was almost unbearable. But I didn't respond. What could I say? That I missed her too? That I loved her despite everything? That the truth had made love impossible to sustain? Instead, I deleted the message and blocked the number. It was cruel, maybe, but continuing contact would only prolong the pain for all of us. Isabella would adapt, children always did. She'd forget about the man who'd briefly been her father, who'd sung her lullabies and changed her diapers and promised to always be there. She'd grow up with June as her uncle, and eventually, maybe, with a stepfather who didn't require deception to love her. The thought should have been comforting, but it felt like another small death. 3 weeks in, I finally forced myself to clean out the remaining traces of their presence. The high chair I'd assembled with such pride went to a young Filipino couple downstairs who had a baby of their own. The toys and clothes I donated to a children's charity in town, though I kept one small stuffed elephant that Isabella had been particularly attached to. I told myself it was for practical reasons, that the charity could use it, but really I couldn't bear to give away every piece of evidence that she'd existed in my life. The worst part was the nights. During the day, I could distract myself with practical tasks, with reading, with long walks through parts of Tagbilaran I'd never explored. But at night, alone in the bed we'd all shared, the loss felt infinite. I'd reach for my phone a dozen times, wanting to call Ria, wanting to ask about Isabella's sleeping patterns, about whether she was eating well, about the small daily details that had once been my responsibility. But I never made the calls. What right did I have to worry about a child who wasn't mine? A month after the revelation, I ran into Dr. Santos from the dental clinic at the grocery store. He recognized me immediately and approached with a warm smile. "Clayton, How have you been? We haven't seen you for your regular checkups. I've been dealing with some personal issues, I said, uncomfortable with the attention. And Ria? How is she? She seemed very upset when she left her job. My stomach dropped. She left her job? Yes, about 2 weeks ago. She said she needed to spend more time with her daughter, but between you and me, I think she was embarrassed about something. She wouldn't say what. The conversation haunted me for days. Ria had quit her job, which meant she was probably struggling financially again. Was she back to doing laundry work with her mother? Was Isabella getting proper medical care when she needed it? The responsible, caring part of me wanted to help, wanted to make sure they were okay even if we couldn't be together. But the wounded, protective part of me knew that any contact would be a step backward into a dynamic I couldn't trust. I started having dreams about Isabella. In some, she was older, maybe 5 or 6, asking me why I'd abandoned her. In others, she was still a baby, reaching for me while I backed away, unable to bridge the distance between us. I'd wake up sweating and disoriented, the phantom sound of her crying echoing in the empty apartment. Sleep became something to be avoided rather than sought. 5 weeks after they left, I made a decision that surprised even me. I went to the local internet cafe and logged into my online banking, then transferred 5,000 pesos to Ria's account. Not enough to solve all her problems, but enough to buy Isabella formula and diapers for a month. I included no message, no explanation. It was purely practical support for a child I'd loved, regardless of who her father was. When I got home, I felt both lighter and heavier, as if I'd done something necessary but ultimately self-destructive. The response came the next day, another text from the blocked number, somehow reaching me anyway. Thank you. You didn't have to do that. Again, I didn't reply. But knowing she'd received the money, knowing it would help Isabella, gave me the first peaceful night's sleep I'd had in weeks. Maybe this was how it would be now. Anonymous support from a distance. Love expressed through action rather than presence. It wasn't the family I'd dreamed of, but it was something. 6 weeks in, I finally admitted to myself that I needed to make a choice about my future. I could stay in the Philippines and rebuild my life here, accepting the loss and moving forward with the hard-won wisdom of experience. Or I could go back to Charlotte, to the familiar disappointments and comfortable routines I'd fled in the first place. Neither option felt particularly appealing, but staying felt like the braver choice. Running away again would solve nothing. I started going to the expat meetups again, forcing myself to socialize even when I didn't feel like it. Ron was always there, a steady presence, who understood without judgment. Other members of the group had noticed my absence and welcomed me back with the casual kindness of people who'd all made major life changes themselves. Nobody asked too many questions about where I'd been or why I looked like I'd aged 5 years in 2 months. You thinking about dating again? Ron asked one evening as we sat at the bar after the official meetup had ended. Not even close, I replied. I can barely handle being alone with my thoughts, much less trying to navigate another relationship. Fair enough, but don't write it off forever. There are good women here, honest women. You just have to be smarter about the red flags next time. I don't think there's going to be a next time, I said. I think I'm done trying to build families with other people's children. But even as I said it, I knew I wasn't entirely convinced. The capacity for love doesn't disappear just because it's been betrayed. The desire for connection doesn't fade just because it's been manipulated. Somewhere deep inside, I still believed in the possibility of finding real partnership, authentic intimacy, honest affection. It would take time to trust again, time to heal from the particular wounds that deception leaves behind. But maybe that was okay. Maybe healing was supposed to be slow and deliberate rather than quick and desperate. 2 months after losing my family, I was finally ready to admit that the loss had taught me something valuable about myself. I was capable of profound love, even if I directed it toward the wrong situation. I was capable of sacrifice and commitment, even if those qualities had been exploited. I was capable of being a good father, even if I'd never get the chance to prove it again. The DNA test had destroyed my illusions, but it had also revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. In the strange mathematics of heartbreak that almost felt like enough. 8 months had passed since that devastating evening when the DNA results shattered my world. 8 months of slowly learning how to exist in the space between who I'd been and who I was becoming. The raw grief had dulled to a manageable ache, like an old injury that still twinges when the weather changes. I'd moved out of the apartment Ria and I had shared, finding a smaller place near the sea where I could watch the sunrise over water that stretched endlessly toward horizons I'd never see. My days had taken on a different rhythm now. Morning coffee on a tiny balcony overlooking Bohol Strait, emails to Sarah that had grown longer and more frequent, afternoon walks through markets where vendors no longer asked about my wife and baby. I'd become just another middle-aged foreigner, living quietly in the provinces, unremarkable and unattached. It was peaceful in a way I'd never expected to find appealing. The first time I saw them again was completely by accident. I was walking out of the grocery store, plastic bags full of the simple provisions of a solitary life, when I heard a familiar laugh. My head turned automatically toward the sound, and there she was. Ria, pushing a stroller through the parking area, talking animatedly with an older Filipina woman I didn't recognize. Isabella was there too. Obviously, bigger now, wearing a pink dress I'd never seen before. She looked healthy and happy, babbling to herself while examining a small toy. For a moment I considered approaching them. Part of me wanted to see if Isabella would remember me, if she'd smile that radiant smile that used to be the best part of my day. But a larger part of me knew that would be selfish and probably harmful. They'd moved on, built a life that didn't include me. I was a chapter in their story that had ended months ago. So I stood there behind a concrete pillar, watching the family I'd briefly been part of, feeling something between nostalgia and relief. Ria looked different. Thinner, maybe, but also more confident somehow. She was dressed nicely, her hair longer than it had been when we were together. The woman with her could have been a relative or friend, someone offering the kind of support I'd once provided. They seemed easy together, comfortable. When Isabella dropped her toy, Ria bent to retrieve it with the practiced efficiency of a mother who'd learned to handle everything herself. She was surviving just fine without me. I watched them disappear into the distance, and surprisingly, I felt glad for them. Whatever pain my departure had caused, whatever confusion Isabella might have experienced, they were clearly thriving now. That was all I'd ever really wanted for them, even during the worst moments of feeling betrayed and used. Children deserve stability and love, regardless of the complicated circumstances that brought them into the world. The second encounter was different. I was having lunch at a small seaside restaurant, the kind of place where you can eat grilled fish and rice while watching boats come and go from the harbor. It was the middle of the week, not busy, just a few local families and the occasional tourist. I was reading a paperback novel and enjoying the peaceful anonymity when I heard someone say my name. Clayton? I looked up to see June standing beside my table, Isabella balanced on his hip. She was bigger now, probably 18 months old, with longer hair tied in tiny pigtails. She looked at me with curious eyes, no recognition but no fear either. Just the natural wariness of a toddler meeting a stranger. "Hello, June," I said, setting down my book. "How are you?" "I'm good, thank you. We're good." He gestured to indicate himself and Isabella. "This is unexpected." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." We stood there for an awkward moment, two men connected by a child who belonged to neither of us in the way we'd once believed. Isabella reached toward my water glass, fascinated by the condensation beating on its surface. "She's gotten so big," I said because it seemed like the appropriate thing to mention. "Yes, she grows very fast. Very smart too. She says many words now. That's wonderful." June shifted Isabella to his other hip, clearly uncomfortable but trying to be polite. "Ria told me about the test you did, about what you discovered. I'm sure she did. I want you to know, I never knew you didn't know, about Miguel being the father. I thought Ria had told you everything from the beginning." "It's not your fault, June. You were just trying to help your niece. Still, I'm sorry for the confusion, for the pain it must have caused." Isabella had grown bored with our conversation and was making impatient sounds, trying to twist out of Jun's arms. "We should go," he said. "She needs her nap soon." "Of course." I hesitated, then said, "Jun? Is she doing well? Really well?" He smiled genuinely for the first time since approaching my table. "She's perfect. Happy, healthy, very loved. Ria is a good mother, and we help as much as we can. She doesn't need for anything important." That's all I ever wanted, I said, and meant it completely. For both of them to be okay. They are okay, June assured me. And you? Are you okay? The question surprised me with its sincerity. This young man, who had every reason to resent me for disrupting his family's equilibrium, was genuinely concerned about my welfare. I'm getting there, I said, day by day. After they left, I sat at that restaurant for another hour, watching the boats and thinking about the strange turns life takes. 6 months ago, I would have been devastated by that encounter. The sight of Isabella not remembering me, the casual way June spoke about their life moving forward without my presence, would have felt like fresh wounds. But today, it felt more like closure. They were fine. I was fine. We were all fine, just in different ways than we'd once imagined. That evening, I called Sarah again. We'd been talking regularly since my breakdown months earlier, slowly rebuilding the relationship I'd neglected for too many years. I saw them today, I told her, Ria and the baby. How did that feel? Surprisingly okay, I said, realizing as I spoke that it was true. They looked happy, healthy. The baby doesn't remember me at all, which is probably for the best. Are you sad about that? A little, but also relieved. She's not carrying around any trauma from my sudden disappearance. She's just a normal toddler living a normal life with people who love her. That's a mature way to look at it, Dad. I'm trying to be mature about a lot of things these days, including the way I treated you and your brother when you were growing up. We've talked about this. You're a different person now than you were then. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just the same person who's learned from his mistakes. We talked about her upcoming visit to see me, the first time she'd be traveling to the Philippines. She wanted to experience the place that had changed me so dramatically, to understand what I'd found here beyond the heartbreak and deception. I'm proud of you, she said before we hung up, for staying, for rebuilding, for not letting one bad experience define your whole adventure. Later that week, I volunteer at a local children's center, helping teach basic English to kids whose parents work in the tourist industry. It's something I'd started doing after the initial grief subsided, a way to channel my paternal instincts toward something unambiguously positive. The children range in age from 5 to 12, all eager and curious and completely uninterested in my personal drama. To them, I'm just Teacher Clayton, the American who sometimes brings stickers and always laughs at their jokes. One afternoon, a little girl named Maria asked me if I had children of my own. It was the first time anyone had posed that question directly since everything fell apart. I thought I did, once, I said carefully. But it turned out I was wrong. That's sad, she said with the straightforward empathy that children possess. But you're still a good teacher. You can be like a dad to all of us. The simplicity of her logic was both heartbreaking and healing. The truth is, I'm still learning how to be alone without being lonely. Some days are easier than others. Some days I wake up grateful for the peaceful simplicity of my life, for the freedom to make decisions based purely on my own needs and desires. Other days, I miss the beautiful chaos of family life so intensely that I can barely function, but those difficult days are becoming less frequent, less devastating when they do occur. I've started dating again, cautiously, and with much better boundaries than before. Nothing serious. Just coffee conversations and casual dinners with women who understand that I'm not looking for anyone to complete me or fix my problems. I'm complete already, just differently than I once imagined. If love comes again, it will be because two whole people choose to share their lives, not because either of us is trying to fill a void that someone else left behind. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never ordered that DNA test. Would I still be living the beautiful lie, raising Isabella as my own, planning a future with Ria that was built on deception? Would the truth have emerged eventually, creating even more damage when Isabella was older and the stakes were higher? I'll never know, and I've made peace with that uncertainty. What I do know is that love is not diminished by being misdirected. The care I felt for Isabella, the devotion I showed to Ria, the hope I invested in our little family, none of that was wasted just because it was based on incomplete information. I was capable of profound love then, and I'm capable of it now. The next time, if there is a next time, I'll simply be wiser about where I direct it. As I write this, the sun is setting over the Bohol Strait, painting the water in shades of gold and purple that never fail to take my breath away. Tomorrow, Sarah arrives for her 2-week visit. Next month, I'm thinking about taking a trip to Palawan, exploring parts of the Philippines I've never seen. I have a life here now, not the one I originally planned, but a good one nonetheless. I'm no longer the lonely man who fled North Carolina in search of meaning. I'm no longer the confused father figure who discovered his family was an illusion. I'm just Clayton, middle-aged American, teaching English and watching sunsets and learning that sometimes the best thing you can do with a broken heart is let it heal crooked but strong. Sometimes being a stranger is exactly what you need to be.